The FAA grounds all domestic flights for the first time since 9/11. Obesity, gun violence, and drug overdoses have taken over the United States death rate. Joy Reid, a black woman, accuses a GOP congressman of being a diversity hire. Disney has demanded that its employees return in person 4 days a week. And since it's the week of Friday the 13th, I tell you a spooky story of a lady cop turned murderer. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, it is Thursday, January 12th, 2023. I hope that you all are having a great week. So before we dive into news, I want to remind you that there has been a Venmo that we have publicized on this show that is SRA Foundation 1. And those of you who remember what I'm talking about will know that this pertains to a terrible accident that happened in Whittier, California with some LAPD training officers. On November 16th, a group of about 75 recruits were out jogging as part of their training to be in the LAPD, when all of a sudden a 22-year-old driver crossed over lanes of traffic and mowed 25 of those 75 recruits over. Luckily, as far as we know, no one died, but several of those recruits lost limbs, and some are still in the hospital. So I publicized this Venmo at the end of the year last year, 2022, which sounds like a long time ago. It was just a few days ago. But I'd like to remind you of it because it is so important. This money will go towards those officers and their families. That is SRA Foundation 1. That's their Venmo, SRA Foundation 1. And in the description below, I'm going to put the mailing address in case you would like to send a check. The reason why I bring this up is because I just guest hosted the third hour of Dennis Prager's radio show. And I had a caller call in who may be listening live right now. His name was Steve. Where was he from, Sean? Texas? Do you remember? South Carolina? Yeah, sorry, I can't remember where you're from, Steve. But Steve called in, and I gotta say he was a little bit abrasive, a little bit cheeky, but that's okay. I can handle that, and I like that. And he called in and he said, you know, it's very easy to be a conservative talk show host right now. You and Dennis Prager complain all the time about the rotten state that the country is in. And what are some tangible things that everyday citizens can do to reverse the tide? And although, again, he was a bit snarky, what I wish I had said to him was, oh, you think it's so easy being a conservative talk show host, why don't you try it? I'm not complaining. I love my job, but it is very hard to put yourself out there and subject yourself to a relentless criticism by other people. But I did appreciate what he asked, and I think it is important for us to return to these tangible things that we can do. And one of the ways that I answered Steve is by saying that one of the ways that you can really help reverse the tide is by supporting your local and state law enforcement. I have a theory as to why the left hates the police so much. I think it's because policing is one of the few institutions of civic society that the left hasn't completely dug their claws into. Think about it. They've taken over the education system, they've taken over the government, they've taken over the media. When I say take over, I don't mean that they 100% control everything, but really the ones who control most of the levers of power in this country across all of the institutions are on the left. But the one exception to that is the police force. The police force right now really hasn't been infiltrated by the left, and again, that's why I think that the left hates them so much. So, thank you, Steve, for bringing that up, because it reminded me to remind you all to please consider donating to that SRA Foundation. And I'm sure if you live in other places besides Los Angeles, across the country, there are so many funds that you can donate to, because unfortunately cops and recruits and officers are harmed all of the time. So please do consider doing that. Now, on to news that I promised to deliver. I'm sure we are all aware that yesterday was a crazy day for the Federal Aviation Administration. There was a temporary grounding of all domestic flights yesterday morning, which was the first time that this happened in our country since 9/11, which is pretty staggering. But obviously, during 9/11, there was a terrorist attack. This time, it was because of an outage and a malfunctioning in the FAA system. 9,500 flights were delayed yesterday and 1,300 flights were canceled. So what happened? The Notice to Air mission system, which is apparently a system that provides safety information to pilots, malfunctioned, according to the FAA. Now, what's important to note here is that the Notice to Air mission system was once called the Notice to Air man system, but our great U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, changed it from man to mission because that was more PC. Clearly, his priorities are right in order. Anyway, the FAA says that this Notice to Air mission system failed because of a damaged database file. The Biden administration has said that there isn't evidence right now that there may have been foreign interference or a cyber security threat, but a damaged database file does make it seem like that might have happened. Now, this grounding of all domestic flights yesterday is also coming alongside other malfunctioning news in the airline arena. A Delta plane caught on fire yesterday. The engine, I should say, of a Delta plane caught on fire right before it was about to take off yesterday in Atlanta at the John Wayne International Airport. Luckily, the plane was not in the air, so people could evacuate, but still, engine caught on fire, which needless to say is not great news. And during the holidays, Southwest Airlines had a huge scheduling malfunction. Their system broke down, which caused 60% of flights, Southwest flights, to be delayed or canceled. So clearly what all of this reveals is that our system of aviation is not functioning properly. Now, President Biden has been in office for just over 2 years, and he has spent $6 trillion, that's right, trillion dollars in discretionary spending. That's non-mandatory spending, okay? That doesn't even count the billions and billions, probably trillions of dollars that we spend in mandatory spending, which is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the federal debt. He has spent $6 trillion in non-mandatory spending. So the question is, why is our aviation system malfunctioning? Shouldn't this be high on his list of where our taxpayer money should be going towards? When incidents like this happen, it just reaffirms how much we Americans need a receipt system. When we pay state or federal income taxes, I fervently believe that we should get a receipt that lists where our money goes to. Because A, we worked hard for that money. It's good for us to know where it is going to. And second of all, that keeps people like President Biden held accountable because, and not just President Biden, Republicans too. I'm not just singling out a Democrat here, although President Biden has been one of the biggest spenders of our time. But it's important because it holds leaders in check. What it seems like President Biden is doing with our $6 trillion in taxpayer money is he's giving it to an LGBTQ museum. That's right, in the new omnibus spending bill that passed just a few weeks ago, millions of dollars of our taxpayer money is going to an LGBTQ museum. And in New York leadership has announced that a lot of the taxpayer money is going to go towards helping low-income and minority communities open pot dispensaries to try to remediate the wrongs of systemic racism. In other words, there used to be this collective buy-in that we all understood that we paid taxes in order to help our civilization function properly, in order to pay for things like making sure the FAA systems work properly, to pay for things like paving railroads or building bridges. But now it's going towards all of these political woke things, and that's not where our tax money should be going towards. So I really believe the solution here is to have receipts, and we should try so hard to entreat to Republican lawmakers to make that possible. That's what Speaker McCarthy should be focusing on right now in the House. In other news, I'm sorry to bring this next one up because it's not terribly encouraging, but it's quite fascinating. In 2023, so far, there has been all of this information that has come out about the deaths in previous years in the United States. What we see when a new year happens is that obviously the census collects data on the previous year and often does these 20, 30, 40-year trend graphs to see the way that our death rate has changed. And William Galston wrote a fascinating article analyzing the census's outcomes, or I guess information that they've revealed, on how our deaths have changed. And it seems that obesity, gun violence, and drug overdose have creeped in to our death rates, especially over the past 10 years, in a way that makes us eclipse other developed countries. So we in the United States actually, and this was true before COVID, have a lower life expectancy than, as I said, other developed countries. In 2019, we trailed Germany by 2.5 years. We trailed Canada by 3.2, France by 4 years. That's a lot of years. And certainly it's true that the pandemic made things worse. We did in the United States have one of the highest death rates of COVID. But far more than COVID, what has contributed, or what has been the far greater phenomenon, I should say, in death has been drug overdose. In 2000, the year 2000, there were 17,000 Americans who died of a drug overdose. In 2020, that number skyrocketed to 92,000, and now, at the end of 2022, 106,000 Americans died of a drug overdose. That is about a 700% increase from the year 2000. And now, as I've reported a lot on this program, fentanyl is the #1 cause of death of those aged 18 to 45. So in 2020, the United States had 227 drug overdoses per 1 million people in our population. Canada had 171 per million, Germany had 19 per million, and France had 7 per million. So clearly, our country, needless to say, has a drug problem. We also have a grave obesity problem. In 2000, 30% of Americans were clinically obese, and now in 2020, that number rose by 10% to 41.9%. And in 2023, it's looking like the numbers have even gone up a few more percentage points, hovering around 43 to 44%. That's astonishing, that almost half of our population in this country is obese. My God. And then the third trend that has really proliferated over the past 20 years, and especially over the past 50 years, has been gun violence. And interestingly, contrary to popular or received opinion, as restrictions in this country have gone up on guns, or gun deaths have also gone up. So it's not that restrictions have caused less gun violence, but restrictions have caused, well, maybe not caused, but stand alongside more gun violence. Our gun violence numbers are some of the greatest in the world. The US rate of firearm homicides is 41 per 1 million. In Canada, it is 5 per 1 million. In France, it is 3. And in Australia, it's quite low, it's 2. And I thought that William Galston, again, who wrote this great article in the Wall Street Journal analyzing these trends, had a fascinating closing line that I'd like to share with you. He wrote, "We Americans seem less able to control our appetites and our tempers." That is exactly on the nose. I opened this segment by telling you that it's sort of a depressing thing to bring to you, but you could also look at it from the other side, which is that these deaths, each of those, obesity, drug overdose, and gun violence, those are preventable. You know, a lot of people in a lot of countries die from things that are not easily as preventable. Hunger, poverty, other diseases like, malaria certainly has been a high cause of death in developing countries. But here in the United States, many of our problems can be remedied. But the problem is that we have succumbed to this culture where people feel entitled to live their truths and indulge their impulses whenever they want. And by the way, I want to make very clear, I have enormous sympathy for those who die of obesity or those who die of drug overdoses. I'm not saying that, you know, it's completely within their control. People do suffer from genetic problems, chronic illnesses that make them have a greater, you know, proclivity to be obese or to abuse drugs. I have total respect for that. But still, what these three causes of death have in common is a lack of self-control. I'd like to play a clip for you that may seem unrelated, but I think it actually is. It was from the Golden Globes the other night. And it's from this actress, Michelle Yeoh, who played the mother on Crazy Rich Asians. And she, very harshly, when she was giving her acceptance speech for winning the Golden Globe, told the guy playing the music to kind of usher her out to shut up. Let's play the clip and I'll explain why it's relevant to this.
Shut up, please. I can beat you up, okay? And that's serious.
God bless you, my mother.
Oh,
I love
well,
you.
Then there's Denzel
my beautiful
Washington.
wife.
I don't know why a clip of Denzel Washington went alongside Michelle Yeoh, but still, you know, people are laughing at that moment, and I guess there's a part of it that's kind of funny, but what it shows there is Michelle Yeoh is being disrespectful. She's just doing exactly what she wants to do. She wants to keep talking beyond the allotted time of her acceptance speech, so she's telling the guy to shut up. And what kind of message is that sending to the rest of us? That you can just do whatever you want to do? And again, it's part of this greater cultural problem where we encourage people to indulge instead of to control their impulses. I think the biggest and most fundamental difference between liberals and conservatives is this very issue. Liberals tell you that society is the problem. It's societal forces that push you to eat a burger. It's societal forces that, you know, push you to do a line of cocaine or to smoke a joint. But one of the biggest reasons why I'm conservative is because I believe so much in the power of the individual. Yes, there are some circumstances in life that make things harder for you and may make you more inclined to eat a burger or, you know, succumb to doing drugs if you're in a really bad situation. But what we should be teaching people is to control themselves. Because if we do, then we will see a reversal in these trends. And I think it is no coincidence that as our society has adopted more of this self-esteem as opposed to self-control movement, more of these causes of deaths have gone up. In another news story that was quite staggering, Joy Reid, who is an MSNBC host, by the way, I heard someone the other day call it MSDNC, which I thought was funny because obviously MSNBC is sort of a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party. Anyway, Joy Reid was on the air and she was interviewing a House of Representatives member, Rep. Byron Donalds from the state of Florida, who is a Republican. And she had a very interesting exchange with him. I can't remember if I told you she is a black woman, and this is relevant for the discussion, because she suggested that Rep. Donalds might be a diversity hire. Let's listen to the clip.
So do you not believe that the idea was to make a diversity statement by nominating you?
Well, actually, first, that was not the idea, because I was in the room when the decision was made by people who chose to nominate me. That never.
And you've still not explained how you were qualified. You've never been in leadership.
Are you going to let me answer your question?
Sure,
or you
tell
want
us.
to take over me? Okay. Number two. Now let's go back. The reality is that a lot of members actually do believe in my ability to lead. They do. Am I to be despised for my youth because I've served one term, when members know that I have the ability to engage other members through the conference? But it's even bigger than that. Listen, we were at an impasse last week in our speakership elections. We got that done. Kevin McCarthy is now Speaker of the House.
On voting laws, you defend voting laws that said getting rid of ballot harvesting is a good thing that we did. So you've defended the Florida voting laws.
And you've actually laws in the country.
The Florida voting laws?
Florida election laws are the best election laws in the country. And go ask Arizona, go ask California, go ask New York. We do it the best.
Okay, all right.
So what they're talking about here is that Rep. Donalds was one of the people who was going to be nominated to be Speaker of the House. And as we know, Kevin McCarthy ultimately won after 15 rounds of voting, no less, but still he did win. So that I just wanted to provide you with that context of what that exchange was about. Rep Donalds, I should call him Representative Donalds, but I have here in my notes Rep, so pardon me. Representative Donalds handled that with such grace. If I were he, I would have come back to Joy Reid and said, well, are you a diversity hire? I mean, the audacity of her to ask that, especially when the left talks all the time about how calling Black people or minorities diversity hires is an offensive term because it undermines their merit. But the thing that this reveals is that those on the left do not view Black conservatives as Black. They don't really view Black conservatives as people. It's quite interesting because you hear the left talking so much about protecting Black people, protecting minorities, protecting women, allowing them to speak, giving them a seat at the table. But then if you're a Black conservative, it's like you've inhabited some other body, and they just dehumanize those Black conservatives. When Larry Elder was running for governor of California, the LA Times published an article, an editorial that called him the black face of white supremacy. Do you know how racist that is? To say that Larry Elder, because he's a conservative, must not be able to think for himself, must be somehow confused in representing white supremacy even though he's Black. It is the most racist thing to say that Black people have to be Democrats. Because again, it makes it seem like they cannot think for themselves. Or let's look at the way that they treat Candace Owens, constantly calling her a fascist and a Nazi. And by the way, I don't always agree with the way that Candace goes about things, but they try every single chance they get her, to try to shout her down and make her seem like this mustache-twirling cartoon character villain when she's not. I thought we're supposed to uplift and protect Black women. Or perhaps the biggest example, look at what they did to Clarence Thomas. The NAACP, when Clarence Thomas was going through his hearings in the 90s, withdrew their support of him, even though there was no evidence that he did what he was accused of doing to Anita Hill. Anita Hill had very shabby evidence. In fact, some of the more lewd examples that she gave of what Justice Thomas allegedly said to her actually came from a court case. But still, all of these African American support groups, which proclaimed to support Black people in politics, withdrew their support of Clarence Thomas. And for those of you who haven't seen it, you really should Google the way that the speech that he gave in response to the charges against him. He called it a high-tech lynching. It was just astounding. But more generally, what we have to do as conservatives is remind people so often, because racism and race is so overhyped and so talked about ad nauseum in this country, we have to remind people who the real racists are. It's those on the left, not on the right. If you took two blank pieces of paper and you wrote down the left's position on race on one piece of paper and then the right's position on race on another piece of paper, and you gave those two pieces of paper to aliens who have never been to Earth and said, which one of these groups do you think is the most racist? There would be no doubt in my mind that they would choose the piece of paper that had the left-wing views. Because what the left would write down on their piece of paper is that we want segregated dormitories and segregated graduations. We want to lower standards for Black people. We want to defund the police so Black neighborhoods are not as heavily policed. And we want to not acknowledge the problem that fatherlessness and out-of-wedlock births cause in the Black community. And not just in the Black community, in every community. If you look at the statistics across the board, the people who are the most likely to drop out of school, the most likely to go to prison, to engage in violent behavior are those who grew up in fatherless households. Black people tend to be overrepresented in fatherless households, but still, this goes across racial groups. It's certainly true for white people and Hispanic people too. That would be on the left's piece of paper. On the right's piece of paper, it would say, we want to have integrated spaces where people of all minorities live and work and graduate together. We want to have the same standards across the board because we do not believe that anyone is inferior. We believe that everyone, if given the right opportunities and the same opportunities, have the ability to reach their potential. We would say that policing is incredibly important, especially in minority communities where the crime rates tend to be the highest. And on that piece of paper, we would write that we recognize the role that cultural factors such as fatherlessness plays. Again, which slip of paper do you think the alien would choose as being racist? Definitely not the conservative one. Now, finally, because these past 3 stories have been talking about bad news, I want to give you some good news and compliment a company that I otherwise wouldn't compliment. So get ready for this one. Disney has announced to its 200,000 employees that they are demanding that those employees must work 4 days a week from one of the Disney offices. Bob Iger, the CEO who retired and then came back, wrote this in an email to employees, saying that they understood that people needed to work from home during the pandemic, but they miss and value in-person work. So again, they are calling for their employees, or demanding, I should say, for them to come in 4 days a week. And this is one of the only Fortune 500 or top 100 companies in the United States who has made this statement, trying to get workers to come back in person. Most companies, in fact, almost all companies, have a hybrid system of work. Warner Brothers, Apple, and Google do demand that their workers have to come back 3 days a week, but according to the data, that's not really enforced, and they have a lot of exceptions for it. Now, the Census Bureau, because all of this information, again, has come out at the end of the year, has said that between 2019 and 2021, the percentage of people working from home tripled. It used to be just 5.7% of the population. Can you believe that? It seems like it's close to 100%. It used to be only 9 million Americans working from home, and in 2021, that rose to 18%, or 27.6 million Americans. And now, in 2023, I would bet you it's in the 30s or 40s. So I am 23 years old. I just graduated from college, and I have to tell you anecdotally that every single one of my friends and I have hybrid working systems where we work both in the office and from home. And I'm very interested to hear what you all think. You can email me or you can write in the comments with your responses. We hate it. We think it is so, again, I'm sorry to speak for all of my friends, but I think I think I have all of their points of view in line correctly. We all hate it because we can't meet people by primarily working from home. The workplace used to be a place where you would find friends, where you would maybe potentially meet your future spouse. And now we feel so siloed and segregated, and the only way that you can meet people is online. And additionally, it seems like our ability to be productive workers has diminished. There are all of these studies that have come out that have said that when you work from home, you are not as motivated. You need to feed off of other people in the office. So I say hats off to Disney for doing this, and I certainly hope that other companies follow suit. Because if you think about it, we just can't continue to live this way. We will have such, again, a segregated, siloed, depressed society if we continue to be away from one another. No wonder drug overdoses and obesity are so high. It's because we're all depressed. We need to feed off of one another. Now, finally, the final segment of the day, because it is the week of Friday the 13th, Friday the 13th is tomorrow, I want to tell you a bit of a spooky crime story that I encountered a few weeks ago, thanks to my mom, who is a crime aficionado, and it's very, sort of gives you the chills when you hear it. By the way, I was listening to Megyn Kelly recently, and Megyn Kelly said that women have more of a proclivity to like true crime stories than men. I wonder why that is the case. If you have any theories on that, let me know. Maybe we just like more of the gossip. But first, before I tell you this true crime story, I tried to do some research on why Friday the 13th is considered to be a spooky day, and why in general the number 13, is considered to be haunted. And many buildings, I'm sure some of you know, they do not have a 13th floor. It just goes from 12 to 14. So it seems to have been a cultural cornerstone of our society for a while that 13th is a no-no number. And here is why. Like so many things in our society, it comes from a religious root. And that is that there were 13 people sitting at the Last Supper when Jesus was betrayed by Judas. So over time, it became, again, sort of culturally accepted that the number 13 was not so great. Also, there was an 1834 French play that contributed to this understanding. The French play is called Les Finesses de Gribouilles. I am sure some of you who are from France or who speak French are cringing at my pronunciation. Sean is cracking up. I tried. We're going to put in the description the full name of the play because clearly I did not pronounce that right. Anyway, it is a French play. And there is a character in it, this is from the 19th century, that says, the character says, I was born on a Friday, December the 13th, 1813, from which come all of my misfortunes. So anyway, just some tidbits on why Friday the 13th is so spooky. Now, on to the true crime story that happened here in Los Angeles, and it involved a lady cop in a love story. Let me tell it to you. So there was this lady named Stephanie Lazarus who went to UCLA with a guy named John Ruetten. And Stephanie is kind of a weirdo. You will see from photos that I want my producers to put up of her that she looks almost Elizabeth Holmesy. She has these very strange eyes and this weird smile. And it just seems like she is kind of, as a person, a bit off. Anyway, she had this big crush on this guy, John Ruetten, at UCLA, and they dated on and off. But ultimately, John sort of realized that she was a creep and a freak show and decided to break up with her, which sent Stephanie Lazarus down a dark, dark spiral. Stephanie Lazarus went on to be a Los Angeles County police officer, and she specifically worked in the art theft department. But as she progressed in her years, she could never get over her UCLA love, John Ruetten. And in fact, she continued to stalk him for many years. And when John got married to a woman named Sherry Rasmussen, Stephanie started to stalk Sherry too. Sherry was a nurse at a hospital in Glendale, California, actually just a few miles from here. And Stephanie, the lady cop, the art theft cop, would show up to Sherry's place of work at that Glendale hospital and wait outside of the waiting room and would harass her. I think this was one occasion when she showed up to the workplace and said to her, John is mine, John is in love with me. I know that you guys, I think at the time Sherry and John were married. I know you guys are married, but I am the one who is supposed to be with him. So Sherry, understandably, got the creeps from this encounter, and she went home and she told her husband and she told her parents, and they agreed that it was creepy, but there really wasn't much that they could do about it. Then the lady cop, Stephanie Lazarus, started showing up to John and Sherry's marital home here in Los Angeles for unannounced visits. Again, getting pretty stalkery. And then one day, almost, let me see, this happened in 1986, so that would be, let me do my quick math, 47 years to the day? Is that right? Has it been 47 years? My God. Yeah, Sean, come on, do your math. Yes, 37, okay. I was a history major, forgive me. Almost 37 years to the day, Stephanie Lazarus snuck in to their marital home while John was out at work and actually killed Sherry. They engaged in this fist fight, and I think Stephanie might have strangled her or shot her. The details were unclear. But in the struggle, Stephanie, the lady cop, bit this woman, Sherry. And so then when her husband came home and found Sherry dead, the cops were called and they found this bite mark on this woman and they collected a DNA sample. But back then in the 80s, DNA sampling was not at the level that it is today, so there weren't many conclusions. Now, Sherry's parents and John told the LAPD that it was this lady cop, Stephanie Lazarus. They were convinced that Stephanie had done it, because who else would it be? The lady showed up to Sherry's place of work at the Glendale hospital. The lady would come to their marital home. She was obsessed with John. She thought that this woman, Sherry, had stolen John, her love, away from her. So of course it was the lady cop. But interestingly, the LAPD then in the 80s told Sherry's parents and John that they had been watching too many crime shows, and that there was no way that it could be an LAPD officer. Couldn't be one of our own. So the case was closed for decades. But in 2010, they reopened the case and they decided to investigate Stephanie Lazarus, maybe because they saw that she was a bit idiosyncratic and a bit of an oddball and had these weird behaviors, but they decided to reopen the case. And they followed her when she went out to a restaurant, and Stephanie was sipping on a cup of Coca-Cola, and she threw out the cup, and the DNA people retrieved the cup from the trash can, sampled the DNA, and found that it was a match on the bite mark that was left on Sherry Rasmussen when she was murdered back in 1986. So they figured out that it was the lady cop, and what they did is they took Stephanie Lazarus at LAPD headquarters, again, where she worked, into a room, and they told her that they were going to interview her about an art theft case that they were going to assign her to. But little did she know that they were actually going to question her and then arrest her and charge her with this murder. Now let's play some clips from this interrogation because it's so funny. I mean, sorry to say it's funny because it's such a horrible event, but it really is quite interesting and a bit comical to see the way that Stephanie Lazarus tried to play off like, of course, she did not commit this murder. Let's look at the first clip when the cops ask her if she has ever met the victim, Sherry Rasmussen.
Had you ever met his wife?
I may have.
Do you remember her name or anything, or? Or what she did for a living, or where she worked, or anything about her?
Well, I'm going to say that I think she was a nurse.
Yeah, I bet you would know she's a nurse because you went to her Glendale hospital and harassed her. Let's listen to another clip, and in each of these clips you can see she's getting more freaked out and she's trying to play it off. Now the cops are asking about whether or not Stephanie Lazarus remembers the circumstances regarding Sherry's death.
I mean, you said I was going to interview somebody about art.
Did you ever fight with her?
You mean like we fought?
Yeah. Did you ever duke it out with her?
Yes. Let's play that clip where the cops ask if she ever fought with Sherry. Let's play that one more time.
Did you ever fight with her?
You mean like we fought?
Yeah. Did you ever duke it out with her?
No, I don't think so. I mean...
You'd remember that, right? That would be pretty...
Yeah, I would think so.
Look at that face of Stephanie Lazarus. She's going, no, of course not. How obvious can you be? Well, after a long interrogation, Stephanie, I bet, realized what was really happening, and the cops told her that she was under arrest. So Stephanie Lazarus was finally, 30 years after the case, charged with the murder of Sherry Rasmussen, and she was sentenced to life in prison where she is now. So that is your spooky Friday the 13th week story. Thank you so much for joining us, and remember, each of our thoughts, choices, and actions shape who we are. So let's think clearly, choose wisely, and act with principle and determination. Take care, everyone.